In 1998, a group of business students at Cornell pulled Enron's financial statements for a class project. Enron was a darling. Wall Street loved it. The stock was climbing toward $90 a share, and almost every analyst covering it said, buy. The students ran the numbers through a model most professionals had never heard of, and they turned in a report with one word in it that the entire financial industry missed: sell. They were 3 years early. When Enron finally collapsed in 2001, it was the largest bankruptcy in American history at the time, and those students, essentially, had seen it coming when the professionals didn't. Here's the uncomfortable part. The ratio they used was public. The data was public. So, today I want to answer a question that sounds like clickbait, but isn't. Are there financial ratios that predict collapse before it happens? And the honest answer, the one that'll actually make you money and keep you out of trouble, is yes, but only for a certain kind of collapse. And the collapses that kill you are usually the other kind. Let me show you both. Before any ratio, you need this distinction, because it's the thing 90% of the top 5 ratios videos get wrong. Companies die 2 ways. The first way is slow and visible. The business genuinely deteriorates. Margins compress, debt piles up, cash drains, the numbers rot in plain sight, quarter after quarter, and anyone actually reading the statements can watch it happen. Toys R Us died this way. So did most retail bankruptcies you can name. The second way is hidden and sudden. The business looks healthy, sometimes spectacularly healthy, right up until it doesn't. Because the danger isn't in the reported numbers. The danger is that the reported numbers are fiction. Enron died this way. So did WorldCom. Here's why this matters. The ratios that catch the first kind are useless against the second kind. And the ratios that catch the second kind look paranoid and wrong when applied to the first. If you only know one toolkit, you're blind to half the ways a company can end. So, we're going to build both. 3 ratios for the slow death, 2 for the hidden one. And I'll tell you exactly when each one is lying to you, because every one of them lies sometimes. Let's start with the slow death, because it's the one you can actually act on. The ratio. Interest coverage equals EBIT divided by interest expense. How many times over can the company pay the interest on its debt from its operating earnings? The why. Everybody obsesses over the leverage multiple. Total debt divided by EBITDA. And leverage multiples are where people get fooled, so pay attention, because this is the single most useful thing in this video. When private equity took Toys R Us private in 2005, they loaded it with over $5 billion in debt. The leverage multiple was around 5.7 times EBITDA. And here's the thing, 5.7 times is not scary. Plenty of healthy companies run hotter than that. If you were only watching the leverage multiple, Toys R Us looks survivable. But look at coverage. That debt generated roughly $400 million in annual interest, sitting on top of about $550 million of EBITDA. That's an interest coverage ratio of about 1.4 times. For every dollar of interest they owed, they earned about $1.40. No cushion. Now drop EBITDA 20 or 30%, a normal bad year in retail, and coverage falls below 1. Below 1 means the business no longer earns enough to pay its own interest, let alone invest in stores or fight Amazon. That $400 million a year that should have built their e-commerce platform went to lenders instead. The leverage multiple looked fine. The coverage was lethal. Coverage is the binding constraint, not the multiple. The how, pull EBIT and interest expense, both on the income statement. Divide. Then do the thing nobody does. Stress it. Cut EBIT by 30% and recompute. If coverage drops below roughly 1.5 times under that haircut, you're looking at a company one bad year away from a crisis, regardless of what the leverage multiple says. The when. Coverage matters most for any business carrying meaningful debt. and it matters urgently after a leveraged buyout, a debt-funded acquisition, or a dividend recapitalization. Those are the exact moments interest expense jumps, and everyone's still looking at the old leverage story. Watch it every quarter. The quarter coverage crosses below 2 times and keeps falling is the quarter the clock starts. When it lies, coverage uses EBITDA, which can be inflated. If earnings are being manipulated, hold that thought, coverage looks better than reality. It catches honest over-leveraging. It does not catch dishonest accounting. The ratio. The Altman Z-Score. 5 ratios: working capital, retained earnings, operating earnings, market value of equity, and asset turnover, all relative to assets, combined into one number. Above 3, safe. Below 1.8, distress zone. The why. In 1968, an NYU professor named Edward Altman did something clever. Instead of looking at one ratio at a time, he used a statistical technique to find the combination of ratios that best separated companies that went bankrupt from ones that didn't. The result was startlingly good. In his original tests, it predicted bankruptcy about 72% of the time 2 years out, and 80 to 90% of the time 1 year out. More than 50 years later, it's still one of the most widely used distress models in credit analysis. Not because it's perfect, because it's cheap, fast, and combines several dimensions of health into one legible number. It catches the slow death beautifully. The company whose working capital is thinning and whose retained earnings are eroding shows up in the Z-score before it shows up in the headlines. The how. You don't need to memorize the weights. Dozens of free calculators exist. What matters is interpretation. Don't read the Z-score as a snapshot. Read it as a trajectory. A company sitting at 2.5 is far less interesting than a company that was at 4, then 3, then 2.5 over 3 years. The direction and the slope tell you more than the level. A single Z-score is a photo. 3 in a row is a movie, and the movie is what warns you. The when. Use it on mature, asset-heavy public companies, manufacturers, retailers, industrials. That's the population it was built on. When it lies, and this is important for trust, the Z-score was built in the 1960s on a small sample of manufacturers. Apply it to a modern asset-light software company, a bank, or an early-stage growth business, and it falls apart. Some studies found its accuracy collapsing to as low as 20% on samples far from the original. It has an expiration date and a domain. Anyone who runs a Z-score on a SaaS company and panics doesn't understand the tool. Use it where it belongs. Ignore it where it doesn't. The ratio. Net income versus cash flow from operations. Specifically, is the company reporting profits it isn't collecting in actual cash? The why. This is the bridge between the two kinds of death, and it's the most important idea in this video. There's an old line among forensic accountants: net profit is what the accountants say it is, cash is real. You can shape earnings with assumptions. Cash in the bank is much harder to fake. So when a company reports rising profits, when its operating cash flow is flat or negative, and that gap keeps widening, something is wrong. Either they're selling to customers who aren't paying, or they're recognizing revenue aggressively, or the earnings are simply not real. Back to Enron. In 2000, Enron reported $979 million in net income. In that same year, its operating cash flow was negative $154 million. Read that again. Nearly $1 billion of reported profit, and the actual cash from operations was underwater by $150 million. Meanwhile, revenue had grown 151% over 4 years, and cash simply hadn't followed. The profit was an accounting story. The cash told the truth. The how. 2 moves. First, the eyeball test. Pull 3 years of net income and 3 years of operating cash flow and put them side by side. Over time, in a healthy business, cash flow should roughly track or exceed net income. If profit marches up, while cash stalls or falls, stop and investigate. Second, the precise version, the accrual ratio. Take net income, subtract operating cash flow, divide by total assets. The bigger and more positive that number, the more of the company's earnings are paper rather than cash. Academic research consistently finds that companies with high accruals underperform companies whose earnings are backed by cash. The when. Run this on every company, every time, but especially on the ones that look too good. The high flyer with the beautiful earnings and the stock that only goes up. That's precisely where you most need to check whether the cash is real. This ratio is your early bridge from looks healthy to prove it. When it lies, heavy growth companies investing aggressively can show weak operating cash flow for legitimate reasons. And Enron even learned to fake cash flow for a quarter by disguising loans as operating inflows. Which is why one ratio is never enough, and why we need the last one. The Bankruptcy Z-Score. 8 variables that together estimate the probability that a company is manipulating its earnings. This is the one the Cornell students used. The why. Everything so far assumes the numbers are honest. The Z-Score assumes they might not be. Developed by accounting professor Mesod Benesh, it doesn't measure health. It measures deception. It looks for the fingerprints manipulation leaves behind. Receivables growing faster than sales. Margins deteriorating in ways that create pressure to cheat. Assets growing softer. And critically, a widening gap between reported income and cash. The accrual signal from a moment ago, baked right in. It works. Tested against the highest profile fraud cases from 1998 to 2002. It flagged roughly 71% of them, 12 out of 17, ahead of time. And in the years after, companies it flagged as likely manipulators underperformed the ones it didn't by nearly 10% a year. The Cornell students ran an early version on Enron's 1997 numbers, and it lit up. Experienced analysts with far more resources missed what the model caught. The how. You will not compute 8 variables by hand, and you don't need to. Free Z-Score calculators take a company's financials and spit out the score. The threshold, above roughly negative 2.22, the model considers earnings manipulation likely. Below it, probably clean. Treat a flag not as a verdict, but as a reason to read the footnotes very, very carefully. The when. Use the Z-Score as a screen, not a conclusion. Run it before you invest, before you acquire, before you extend major credit. And run it specifically on the companies that look immaculate. Because immaculate is exactly what a good manipulator engineers. And here's the honesty that builds trust. The Z-Score throws false positives. A company selling off a business line or going through a legitimate one-time shift can trip it without any fraud at all. It even rated Enron as safe in 1999 and 2000. In the exact years the fraud was being buried deepest in off-balance sheet entities. Because the manipulation had moved somewhere the ratios couldn't see. Which brings us to the thing nobody wants to admit. Let me tell you how Lehman Brothers looked in the second quarter of 2008, months before it became the largest bankruptcy in history. Its reported net leverage was 12.1 times. For an investment bank, not alarming. The number looked like it was improving. They'd been actively deleveraging, telling the market they had it under control. It was a magic trick. Lehman used an accounting maneuver called Repo 105 to temporarily move about $50 billion of assets off the balance sheet right at the reporting date, then bring them back days later. Without the gimmick, the leverage was materially higher. The ratio you could see was engineered specifically so you couldn't see the ratio that mattered. This is the lesson that separates people who understand finance from people who memorize ratios. Every ratio is computed from numbers management chose to report. When the fraud lives inside the reported numbers, Toys R Us's honest, visible debt, ratios catch it. When the fraud lives in what's excluded from the numbers, Lehman's hidden assets, Enron's off-balance sheet entities. The ratios you can calculate will look fine because they were built to look fine. So no, there is no single ratio that predicted every collapse. Anyone selling you that is selling you the same false confidence that blew up everyone who trusted Enron's income statement. The ratios are not a crystal ball. They're a smoke detector. And the most dangerous fires are the ones set in the one room where you forgot to install one. So here's how a professional actually uses these. In order. Start with cash flow divergence on everything. Is the profit real? Then interest coverage, stress tested. Can they survive a bad year? Then the Z-Score trajectory. Is the whole picture deteriorating over time? If anything looks off, or the company looks suspiciously perfect, run the M-score. Are they lying? And through all of it, keep asking the Lehman question. What's not in these numbers? No single ratio saves you. The sequence does. The habit does. The refusal to trust a beautiful income statement does. The Cornell students didn't have better data than Wall Street. They had the same public filings everyone else ignored. What they had was the willingness to run the number and believe it when it told them something uncomfortable. That's the whole edge. It always has been. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.